Canadians landed on the beaches of Normandy, France on June 6, 1944. It was an important turning point in World War II as Canadian soldiers helped to liberate Europe from the Nazis. It was not our first experience at war. We were there from 1914 to 1918, giving our lives for what was called the war to end all wars. But as we now know, that would not be the fate of the world. That of a Second World War lasting 6 years from 1939 to 1945. It ended with the world on a nuclear edge and political lines drawn right across continents, countries, cities, and families.
It has been exactly 100 years since the beginning of World War I, and sometimes it is hard to remember what the world was. This was a world where the telephone and the automobile were brand new inventions. There were kings and kingdoms and colonies, and wars were fought over rivalries and revenge. But in the early 1900s, things started to change, and many complex reasons brought about what many people considered an inevitable war.
Canada was ill-prepared for fighting, so when Britain declared war on Germany in 1914, everyday Canadian men and women signed up in her support. It was a civilian army. Farmers, teachers, salesmen, and clerks left their homes and families and signed up. Although we entered as a part of the British Commonwealth, Canada emerged from the trauma of war with a new sense of pride, nationhood, and recognition of the world. Over 600,000 Canadians would go overseas. 60,000 of them would die there. For Canada, a small country of less than 8 million people, it was a huge sacrifice.
The Manning Gate at Ypres, Belgium, was one of the last points for soldiers before heading to the front lines. 90,000 soldiers' names are written on its walls. 90,000 men whose bodies were never found to be buried. The people here remember. There is a last call ceremony every night of the year, rain or shine, and has been since November 11, 1929.
Going to Vimy and seeing how cratered the land was from all the bombs and explosions was extremely eye-opening to the destruction that this war had, and it was truly saddening to see. Going on this tour was a very personal experience for most of us. We had a relative, we knew someone who fought in the war, or we even found our last name on a headstone in a graveyard. It made you feel connected to those you lost and connected to this traumatic experience that those still living went through.
The trip to Europe was very emotional. Although some people might consider this trip to have been a very saddening experience, as it mostly revolved around the trauma and horrors of war, it was also joyful, as we got to see the incredible accomplishments of our nation. Actually seeing the monuments and battlefields gave me an entirely new perspective on what the men and women involved had to go through and the lengths they took to protect their country.
The war came to an end after 4 years of destruction and was followed by a short period of elation and prosperity. But it was not to last. Most of the world was suffering. 17 million people had been killed, and the Spanish flu would kill another 50 million in the years afterward.
This is similar to what it would have been like at the time. So the men were sitting down here almost in the dark, and they were waiting for that call to go up to the surface. So you can imagine it'd be a very long night for those men who are thinking about the battle plans that they've practiced. You can imagine some of them have been in other battles previous to this one, and they're sitting next to men that they've gotten to know quite well, that would have been almost like brothers. And a lot of these men are probably close to your age. Some of them would have lied about their age to come all the way over here to France and to Belgium to fight for another country, right? And so we have to think about the courage these men would have had to have. And if they were looking to their left, to look to their right, they knew that probably one out of the three of them would not be coming out of this battle safely. They knew that by this point in the war, about 1 in 3 men would become casualties of battles like these. So that means dead or wounded. So you can just imagine the courage that they had to have, and ultimately the sacrifice that a lot of them had to have as well. So we're going.
The Great War was soon followed by the Great Depression. As poverty and political tensions rose, dictators around the world came to power, including Hitler in Germany. The world was at war once more, only 21 short years later. It was extremely hard to put visiting the concentration camp into words. The feelings you get when you walk through the gates are incredibly overwhelming, and it is nearly impossible to begin to imagine the horror that went on during the time the camps were in operation. World War II was truly another war that encompassed the entire globe, and like the war before it, the technology of war brought new and destructive weaponry to the sky, under the sea, and on the ground. It also left us with a new vocabulary of horror. The Holocaust, concentration camps, death squads, atomic bombs. Again, no one in Canada was untouched by the war. The war effort was an entire country's burden.
Going to Juno Beach and seeing how vast it was made you realize all the lives that were lost there.
Juno Beach had an amazing memorial in place. That was one of the most incredible places to see, as it gave you not only the feeling of pride in Canadians for what they accomplished that day, but also left you feeling the remorse for those who were lost.
45,000 Canadians would be killed on the battlefields in Europe, Africa, and Asia. 55,000 would be wounded, and a staggering 60 million human beings would die worldwide from war, famine, or war-related diseases, including 6 million Jews who were murdered at the hands of the Nazis. Names such as Dieppe, Sicily, Juno Beach, and D-Day should be known for generations by Canadians.
But it wasn't the last war. The past 60 years have witnessed the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, the Gulf War, the war in Iraq, and the war in Afghanistan. And now the terrorist threat abroad and at home. It makes the hope for peace an elusive goal for today's world.
But we continue to try. We do so in the memory of those Canadians who paid the ultimate sacrifice of their lives over the past 100 years so that we might have peace. The Berlin Wall was an astounding sight to see, especially in the places it had been knocked down. This wall once separated an entire city and families along with it. I can only imagine how that would have destroyed a sense of safety found in the union of a city, family, community, or even a country. It was a saddening sight, but it was also empowering. Thinking about how those people overcame it and tore it down to again unify themselves is a reminder to all of us that together we can overcome anything. We are stronger with love than we are with hate, was what I took away from this. This experience is something I will never forget. In a world where our memory and appreciation for those that fought for our freedom is fading, I am grateful to have seen these places firsthand. Seeing them renewed my appreciation and made Remembrance Day and other celebrations of our efforts mean more to me. I feel now that I have learned about it and seen it, I can truly understand the sacrifice that was made, and that is not something that can be said by a lot of people these days.
Can you lay your life down so a stranger can live? Can you take what you need? Take less than you give.
The lessons learned and memories made on this trip will stay with those who went far longer than a cheap souvenir t-shirt they bought. It will follow them through their whole lives and give them a better understanding of the Canadians' effort in the wars.
One knows your name. That's how legends are made. At least that's what they say.
The Anne Frank House was incredibly inspiring. Although it did not have a lot to do with the soldiers or the people of Canada, it did show us an example of who Canada was trying to save. Anne, like many of us on the trip, was a teen at the time of the Second World War. Seeing the rooms of the house made me reflect and enhance my appreciation for the freedoms we have in Canada.
Never look back, never look down, and never let go. Can you lose everything you ever had planned? Can you sit down again and play another hand?
I was really interested in going on the World Wars tour because it was a lot more beneficial learning something and taking something home versus just touring.
I was really looking forward to going on this tour because it was a way more interesting way to learn about Canada's involvement in the World Wars on an interactive level rather than just sitting in class and reading it from a textbook.
At least that's what they say. We say
I would recommend to every Canadian that they should go to some form of memorial for the soldiers who dedicated their time and lives to our country, whether it be in Canada or in any area where our nation aided another country. This is the best way to connect to those involved and share the loyalty of a nation strong and free.
I'll never look back, never look down, and never let go.
And in return, we must also work in our own ways to promote peace in our families and communities. We will remember.